So vampires are one of those decks that have had a bit of a hard time. They're technically an anime deck, so you'd think that would guarantee them a whole lot of support, but it was the deck of such a random villain of the week that it actually was more of a curse than a blessing. You see, the vampire archetype's original gimmick was milling the deck by sending cards of a certain type from it, like spells or monsters. Oh, but I'm actually talking about the opponent's deck here. Yeah, it's pretty much the opposite of what you'd ever want to do. Pair that up with an incredibly subpar boss monster, and vampires just weren't going to work. Fast forward a bit and then we get the later waves of vampire support. Luckily for vampires, they ditched the whole deck thinning aspect and instead went for a life point paying gimmick, where you lose a bunch of life points for activating their effects, but can then get some of them back with their back row. It was a step in the right direction for sure, but also meant that almost all of their old cards were now completely irrelevant. And so, over time, they just faded back into obscurity, becoming nothing more than a small engine in zombie world decks, if even that. But now, thanks to Battle of Chaos, vampires finally got the support they deserve. With 3 new cards, one of which carries the entire deck on its back, it's now a lot more possible to play vampires as the main component of a deck, rather than just as an engine that, overall, made the zombie world decks more stylish, but also worse. The first of the 3, which is the one you'll absolutely need to make vampires work, is Vampire Ghost. He has 2 effects, and they're both good. The first one forces you to send a vampire from the hand or field on normal summon, to then add a high level vampire to the hand, and finally send a low level vampire to the graveyard. It's a bit like Unizombie, but with a search built in, so you know it's going to be good. The fact that you get to send a low level monster is great, because Familiar and Retainer both need to be in the graveyard to actually work properly, so doing this ensures a search of another vampire monster was Familiar, or a spell or trap card was Retainer. If you didn't know, they actually have a very powerful counter trap with Vampire Domination, so more access to that is always nice. Next, for the search of a high level vampire. I feel like most builds drop the high level vampires, except for maybe Fraulein, since they're a bit clunky to use, but this search means you actually get into some wild combos. Between Shadow Vampire letting you special summon any vampire from the deck, and Vampire Grace being an easy level 6 material, you can finally end on a board a bit more impressive than just a vampire sucker with a set domination. Now, the discard can be a bit of a problem if you draw this card without any other vampires, which is why I decided to go for a full-on vampire deck this time. You need a lot of them in the hand to fuel your combos, which just means running a few more vampires than the bare minimum. However, thanks to Ghost's graveyard effect, you can actually make good use of whatever extra vampires you might have in your hand after your combos. You see, its second effect banishes itself from the graveyard to give you a quick effect to normal summon of a vampire. This can be done during either your main phase or your opponent's, so it really opens up new possibilities. Either you can tribute summon the aforementioned Shadow Vampire to get your combo started, or you can save it for your opponent's turn. Remember Vampire Sucker and her effect that allows you to tribute opponent monsters for a tribute summon? Sure, it does require Zombie World on the field, but still, now that you can get a normal summon as a quick effect, you can basically kaiju your opponent as a quick effect too. This means we can finally get some use out of Vampire Voivode, who'll then get to steal both of the monsters you just kaiju'd. As you can see, this new card really does it all, supporting the new style of vampires by letting them actually combo off properly, but even also supporting some of the older cards by finally giving them a place in modern vampire decks. Sadly, the remaining cards aren't as good as this, but they're still fairly solid, so I'll give them a quick summary. Vampire Fascinator is their new Link 3, and on summon will allow you to steal something from your opponent's graveyard at the cost of locking you into zombies. This can help you climb into Yugioh, I suppose, but can also help you make the Vampire Xyz monsters that let you use an opponent's monster regardless of its level. It's also quite fun as an IP Masquerena target, stealing valuable graveyard resources at the right moment to interrupt your opponent's combos. Its second effect is fairly strong going second, allowing you to tribute a vampire to steal an opponent's monster until the end of the turn. Overall, it's a fun card, but it's mostly situational, not fitting too well into the pre-made combos. The last of the new cards is the Zombie Vampire, and well, I've already talked about this guy in my Ogdoadic video, in which he's actually way more useful. Still, the flexible summoning conditions paired with the milling 4 from both decks could still be useful, especially if you want to get something in the opponent's graveyard to link climb with Fascinator. You probably won't be making this very often, but when you do, it's probably to push for game, and it does that job pretty well thanks to the monsters you stole from your opponent's graveyard only fueling more vampiric sea summons. Anyway, that's the new support, so now let's have a look at the deck. So first things first, I'm going to preempt your cries of shock and horror at there being no Unizombie or Mezuki. I know it seems wild to forego those cards, but the simple truth is they don't actually help you normal summon Vampire Ghost, and since that's most of what you want to be doing with this deck, they just weren't actually too helpful. I did say this was going to be a pure vampire deck, and well, this is about as close as you can get to that while still running good cards. Also, you'll notice some strange looking cards in the side deck. Those are ideas I'll mention for a going second build of this deck, but if you want a full deck list for that, check out my Patreon, the link for it is in the description. Anyway, to start off, if it somehow wasn't already obvious, run 3 Vampire Ghost, and pray to draw him most of the time. Then run 3 of each of the little vampires, since they combo so well with the discards from Ghost. Next are our high level vampires. 1 Shadow Vampire, Scarlet Scourge, Voivode, Vamp, and Fraulein, and then 3 Grace. Shadow, Grace, and Scarlet Scourge are all part of a combo that you'll be seeing in the combo section of the video, so don't worry about them too much for now. But basically, Shadow gets you Scarlet, Scarlet gets another material from the graveyard, and then Grace triggers off of Scarlet, getting you 2 level 6 monsters to make a Beatrice. Beatrice then sends the Necro-Old Banshee, and then on your opponent's turn sends a Doom King Baladroch who can immediately summon himself back. However, as you'll see in my combos, being able to discard Grace early on without needing to first search her allows you to have a ton of flexibilities in your combos, and be a lot more likely to be able to make a Beatrice. So after quite a lot of testing, I actually ended up playing her at 3. You can play less if you want, but trust me, the best combos start off with you discarding her. Voivode and Vamp are here to be 2 material tribute summons, so they're basically the double kaijus of the deck when paired with Sucker. They each have different niches depending on whether you want to extend further with Voivode, or get even more removal with Vamp's equipping effect. Fraulein is a battle phase hand trap, but also there to be more discards since you do need the vampire names. She can be okay to search if you know you won't be able to combo properly after making a Sucker, since at least she helps you stall for a bit. Baladroch is a good boss monster, Jacobolin is very optional but a good way to discard stuff, and then these 2 are mostly for Beatrice combos. Then just run your zombie hand traps with Ash Blossom and Ghost Bell. For your back row, run 3 Zombie World since it's generally just pretty useful in this deck, and then run 3 Domain and 3 Domination. They really need to stop calling spells and traps Domain, this is at least a 3rd one. Anyway, Domain basically gives you yet another normal summon of a vampire, and then does some healing if you leave it on the field, but since the bonus normal summon effect persists even after it leaves the field, it's a great card to send with Retainer or Familiar, since you lose essentially nothing from doing so after having activated its effect. Domination, on the other hand, is an Omni-Negate counter trap, so long as you have a vampire on the field. It can also heal you, so that's a nice bonus. Finally, run Called by the Grave for a bit of protection, Foolish Burial to do basically whatever you want with in this deck, and then 1 for 1 to get a Familiar on the field for a free search of any vampire. For the extra deck, it's mostly links with only a few Xyz monsters. Without Unizombie, there is no point trying to make this into a synchro deck, since honestly you'll never really get to do much with Glow Up Bloom. Zombie and Sheridan are here to be made with your opponent's monsters, usually as a way to push for game in later turns. Beatrice is a huge part of your combos, as she single-handedly gets you a Baladroch, so making her is always something to strive for. Then we run either 1 or 2 Yukionas and then 1 or 2 Vampire Fascinators depending on whichever one you did. Yukiona shuts down banished monsters' effects, and can also negate up to 2 monsters' effects on the field each turn as long as you're summoning from the graveyard. This works very well with Voivode, who'll do the summoning for you. Next run 2 Suckers, then she's a great card, but will probably get beaten over in battle fairly quickly or used as a link material, so you'll want a second one as backup. Savior is just another way to send zombies to the graveyard, so we might as well run him. Then for more generic stuff, Linkuriboh gets to bat or the plant into the graveyard for their effects, The nightmares are just generic removal, with Unicorn being a great IP Masquerena target, and then Appaloosa is pretty easy to make with 4 materials in this deck. That's especially true with IP Masquerena's help, who allows you to make it on your opponent's turn with your used up Beatrice, but can also make Unicorn, Yugioh, or even Fascinator for some interesting plays. Finally, Underworld Goddess is a good way to make use of all the monsters you'll be stealing from your opponent, as well as a way to remove things that have too much protection for you to deal with. So that's their main plan, but with the kaiji-like nature of some of the cards, as well as their Xyz monsters being able to be made out of stolen monsters of any level, you might just want to try a going second build. If so, check out my Patreon for a full list. Otherwise, some ideas are mind control for an easy material, as well as Marionette Might, who can steal anything on the zombie world. There are some other vampire cards like Awakening, but I didn't actually find them too useful, so try them out if you want, but I wouldn't recommend it. So that was the deck. Now for some combos. Right, so now it's time to show off some of the combos you can do thanks to Vampire Ghost. But first, if you've been enjoying the video so far, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. First off, here's a 2-card combo with Ghost and either Familiar or Retainer. Start by normal summoning Ghost, discarding your low level vampire and sending the other one from your deck, while searching a Grace. Discard Grace with Retainer, adding Domain to your hand. Play it and then pay the life points for your second normal summon, before sending it with Familiar to search a Shadow Vampire. Turn the 2 small vampires into a sucker, and then tribute summon Shadow Vampire using Ghost. He'll summon a Scarlet Scourge, he'll summon back Ghost, but also trigger Grace to summon herself back from the graveyard. That will get you a draw from Sucker. Shadow and Ghost can make an IP Masquerena, and then the level 6s can make a Beatrice, who sends Necro-Old Banshee to get a zombie world. Then, during the standby phase, Beatrice can also send a Baladroch, who will immediately revive himself since you have Zombie World on the field, which gives you another draw and triggers Grace again. You're now free to use her as an extra material for IP Masquerena, making an Appaloosa, Yugioh, or if you wanted to conserve life points, you can just leave her in the graveyard instead and make a Fascinator to steal something from your opponent. Also, you did all of this without using Ghost's graveyard effect, so if you have any high level vampires in your hand, which is fairly likely, you can also use his quick effect to kaiju your opponent thanks to Sucker and Zombie World being on the field. With this hand, I'll show you how you can trade Ghost's graveyard effect for more interruptions. Vampire Vamp here can be any vampire at all, and Familiar could also be a Retainer. Start the same as last time, summoning Ghost to send the low levels to the graveyard while searching a Grace. You then discard for Retainer's effect. This time though, it searches Domination, and then you'll discard your third vampire for a Familiar who searches Shadow. Make a Sucker, and then this time you'll need to banish Ghost to tribute summon Shadow, once again getting 4 monsters on the field and a draw. Make IP Masquerena and a Beatrice, and then do the same plays as last time to get a Baladroch on the field during your opponent's turn. This time with Masquerena, I make a Fascinator, but really, whatever you'll make with Masquerena will depend on the situation, which is part of what makes it so powerful. Just make sure to leave a vampire on the field for Domination's requirements to be met. This time I want to show off how Grace's other effect can actually be useful when paired with Fascinator. Start your combo the same as usual, getting a Grace into the graveyard, searching a Shadow Vampire, and a Domination for extra interruption. You won't have a spare material to make a Sucker before Shadow Vampire's effect this time, but that's fine, you can just make it afterwards with the non-level 6s. After playing a Zombie World, make a Beatrice and this time send Bloom so that you get a Baladroch immediately along with a Grace, and then Sucker's draw. You can now force your opponent to send a monster to the graveyard, but that's fine because we have Baladroch's negate in case it did anything important. With those 3, make a Fascinator, you can then summon the monster your opponent set before climbing up into a Yugioh and setting Domination. On your opponent's turn, Baladroch returns, giving you a draw, and if you really wanted to, you can also bring back Grace. For this last hand, I want to show you how to make good use of Voivode to interrupt your opponent with a powerful Kaiju effect. You know the start of the combo by now, except this time Ghost searches Voivode, Retainer searches Domain, which you can then use as a cost for Familiar, who searches Shadow. After making a sucker, Shadow uses up your extra normal summon, getting the usual 4 materials, with who you'll make a Masquerainer and a Beatrice. Do the usual Beatrice plays to make sure you end up with a Baladroch on your opponent's turn. However, this time was Masquerainer, making you Kiona. Since you have a Voivode in hand, and a Zombie World and Sucker on the field, and you haven't used Ghost's Graveyard effect, at any point during your opponent's main phase you can banish it to tribute summon Voivode using 2 of your opponent's monsters, and can then summon them back from your opponent's graveyard, triggering Yugioh to further negate monsters on your opponent's field. So what did you think? Will you give pure vampires a try, or are you sticking to Zombie World builds? Tell me in the comments below. And while you're there, make sure to like and subscribe. Special thanks to my tier 2 patrons, Jason Mira and Violet Rain. The link to my patrons in the description. Thanks for watching!